everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Palavita. I'll be your moderator for today's show. And today's show, we have a very exciting topic, which is going to be the U.S. Supreme Court. And they've had several recent decisions, which we're going to look at today, and how they can impact you and also impact your life on a going forward basis. So with that, we're going to introduce and bring in the former Comptroller General of the United States, the Honorable David M. Walker. David, you're going to at bat with the United States Supreme Court. Can let us know what's going on with their recent decisions.
Well, I think the one that has the biggest impact from an economic standpoint would be the decision that reverses Chevron. Chevron being a decision from a number of years ago, which basically gave deference to executive branch administrative agencies in connection with their regulatory activities. And as you know, our country is built on a constitutional republic with separation of powers between the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And you've heard me say before that I believe the federal government has grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, doesn't have a plan, doesn't focus on achieving positive results and linking resources to results. And one of the problems, quite frankly, is the tremendous expansion of the administrative state, and where you have situations where either presidents try to do things through executive order because they don't like what the Congress is doing or don't believe they can get the Congress to agree with them, or they end up proposing regulations where if there's ambiguity as to what Congress intended, the executive branch agency will end up tilting it the way that they want it to go based upon, the president's philosophy. And as a result, that gives an inordinate amount of power to the executive branch. Whereas we know under our constitutional republic, the legislative branch is the one that's supposed to set the laws. And so basically what the Supreme Court said was that, it eliminated, the presumptive deference where you had a situation where the agency would promulgate the regulation and interpret the regulation, in the absence of any judicial intervention. And now you're going to have to go to the courts. If you have a dispute, that's obviously going to cause a problem for the courts. But ultimately, what we need to do is that we need to right-size government, and we need to get government focused on trying to achieve positive outcome-based results. We need regulations to be able to promote safety and security and prevent abuse. But frankly, we've got way too many. The government tends to layer on rather than rationalize. And we're going to have to rationalize the size of the administrative state because it's way too big, and it's retarding economic growth, and in some cases, competitiveness. So that's the big one. There are other ones that have come down. I mean, I'll mention a couple. Some time ago last year, the Supreme Court came down and told the president that he couldn't do what he wanted to do with regard to student loans, and yet the president seems to be ignoring the highest court in the land. What he proposes to do by forgiving student loans is fiscally irresponsible, inequitable, and unconstitutional. And I think he'll be struck down again. But again, it's just another play for votes to young people. The court also came down and said that what the administration wanted to do with regard to Title IX, basically giving deference to transgender persons in connection with women's sports, was contrary to Title IX, which was designed to promote women's sports. And I know that firsthand because the former Speaker of the House asked GAO to do work on Title IX, wanted to know the adverse impact on men's sports. I told him we'd be happy to do the work, but we're also going to talk about the positive impact on women's sports. Because only looking at one side of the transaction would be contrary with our core values. And that's what we did. We looked at both sides, saw that it did have somewhat of an adverse impact on men's sports, but a significant positive impact on women's sports. But basically there's a difference between, a person whose genes and birth was a woman, and somebody who decides that they want to change their gender, as to whether or not it's fair competition, for women. So that's another one. I'm sure that you can think of others. Immunity, I guess, would be the last one. Presidential immunity. It's amazing how people try to spin these things. I mean, basically what the Supreme Court said is the president gets immunity for official acts, but he does not get any immunity for unofficial acts. And some of the things that have been asserted are just absurd. I was particularly disappointed with Justice Sotomayor's dissenting opinion, where she had comments about using SEAL Team 6 to be able to go after, your political opponents or whatever. I mean, that's obviously not a president's official act. I mean, it's absurd to even think that it would be. And the ultimate irony right now is you have the campaign underway where the Democrats are saying that Trump wants to go after his political opponents if he's elected, when in fact they're already going after him just because he is a political opponent. So, this is a crazy time in a crazy town, and I look forward to hearing what others have to say and to engaging with you and others on these topics.
Okay, we're going to bring in a subject matter expert. This person wrote a book, which I have a copy of. It's one of these big, thick law books called The Chief Justices by Daniel Cotter, for those who haven't seen it or got that. It's available on Amazon.com. He's also an adjunct professor at John Marshall Law School. We'll bring in Dan Cotter, who's an adjunct professor at John Marshall Law School and specializes in Supreme Court decisions, and a partner at Dickinson Wright. So what are your thoughts, Dan, when it comes to the Supreme Court and their recent decisions from the Roberts Court?
Yeah, this has been an impactful term, and I agree with a lot of what Dave said. The administrative state has grown in recent years. There's actually, a series of cases, I think, that really address the administrative state this term, including Loper-Bright, which is the case that Dave talked about with the administrative state, was the Chevron doctrine, which was created by the court in 1984, lasted for about 40 years. And what it said is, as Dave said, was that the courts would defer to decisions of administrative agencies in certain matters. And now they made it head-on clear. This was a facial attack for the first time. They've been nibbling at Chevron doctrine the last several years. And they said that, yes, indeed, Chevron is overruled. There's a couple other cases, though, that I think also will affect people economically, potentially, and change the way that things are done. One is Jarkessi. It was a case against the SEC. The SEC uses administrative law judges like many agencies in our government. And what Jarkessi said is that the Seventh Amendment right to a jury trial still exists in these cases. And so that'll have a major impact for businesses that are facing various agencies, fines, and penalties. The administrative law judges may not be able to do what they think they could do. And then there were two other cases, I think, on the economic side that I think are important for your viewers and listeners to think about, Nick. One is a case called Corner Post. Corner Post said that there's a 6-year statute of limitations in the Administrative Procedures Act, and that the way it's written, that a company could challenge those existing regulations and laws that are on the books, even if they came into existence after the law was out there already. And in this case, it had to do with a little gas station, I think in South Dakota, that challenged on its face regulations about credit card fees. And what happened in that case was that the law came into effect, I think, in 2010 or something like that. The business was created in 2018, and that company was found to be able to challenge that law. And so this will potentially allow those that are seeking to take down some of the administrative state to challenge various regulations and laws that are on the books by creating an entity, for example, for that sole purpose, and then challenging on its face regulations that have been in existence for some period of time. And finally, there was a case, Ohio versus the EPA, that had to do with comment periods and comments taken in by federal agencies. And so these 4 cases, I think, combined will have a significant impact. As Dave said, I think what's going to happen is that the courts are going to be dealt with the obligations to sort through these things, because now it's the judicial decisions. And so some have argued that it's a transfer of power from the executive to the judicial branch. We'll see what happens with that. What's interesting, I think, for your listeners and viewers is that while in this immunity case, the court in some ways confirmed what existed, that SEAL team thing, by the way, Dave, was actually argued by Trump's lawyers at the lower level at the appellate court, and they made that argument. So maybe Sotomayor was borrowing from that, but in any event, that probably would not be found to be an actual official act. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to figure out how that could be. But what's interesting is that case, when you look at it, potentially maybe expands the executive power, at least with immunity. Debate about that and the 119-page decision with dissents and concurrences. But on the opposite hand, these cases like Chevron and other things, as Dave said, is starting to rein in the executive power. So it'll be interesting to see how these two concepts kind of come together. The reality is, I think, for everybody to understand, is that while these cases are going to shake out over the next several years and terms, there'll be a lot of challenges to various regulations. One in the crosshairs right now is the Federal Trade Commission non-compete regulations that they just came out with recently, and there's already been suits that's an overstep of their power. But it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out in the coming years. Another case, I think, that's from an economic impact standpoint, potentially, that could impact businesses is the Purdue Pharma case that came out 2 weeks ago now, I guess it is. And in Purdue Pharma, the court said that these settlements are not necessarily appropriate. And so they looked at the Purdue Pharma settlement and unwound that. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts bankruptcy filings and the strategy going forward.
Well, Dan, I think it would be interesting what kind of challenges might be forthcoming, in particular in connection with the green agenda, which is, obviously very controversial. I mean, there's absolutely no question that climate change is real and that humans have something to do with it. At the same point in time, the administration is trying to have the U.S. move very dramatically to alternative forms of energy, through a variety of different actions, which in my opinion, it's unrealistic about how quickly we can do what they want us to do. In addition, what a lot of people don't seem to understand is that air and water doesn't respect geopolitical boundaries. And we can do everything that we want to do. But if Russia and China and India and other parts of the world, which actually have more pollution going on, if they don't end up doing their part, we can't solve the problem. But I'm going to pivot for a second. On the other hand, our finances are in such bad shape, which is something that we can solve and only we can solve, and yet we're not moving to do it. But if we don't solve it, there would be a crisis of confidence that would have a serious adverse impact globally. And with that, let me give you a Supreme Court issue that may be coming up. It's not there yet, and see if you have any reaction to it. As you may know, under the Constitution, under Article 5, which deals with the constitutional amendments, there are two ways to get an amendment. The old-fashioned way, 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate pass an identical amendment. They send it to the states. If 3/4 of the states ratify it, it becomes part of the Constitution. We've got 27 amendments. They've all been done that way. The last one dealing with congressional pay, which took over 200 years to ratify because it didn't have an expiration date on it. Okay. The second way is that the founders were pretty smart people. Just like we talked about separation of powers, on the administrative state, the founders said, we kind of envisioned that one day Congress might become so out of touch or so out of control, or there might be certain issues where there's such a fundamental conflict of interest, things like controlling spending and escalating debt, things like term limits, things like campaign finance, that the Congress may not want to do it. And therefore, the states should have the right to be able to propose their own amendments. And then, if 2/3 of the states file an application for a convention of states to propose one or more amendments, not a constitutional convention, a convention of states to propose one or more amendments. That was not what 1787 was about. It was dealing with the Articles of Confederation. Right. Then the Congress shall call the convention. Express, enumerated, ministerial, non-discretionary, okay? And the Congress may set the mode of ratification, either state legislatures or state conventions, or the mode of ratification. Well, guess what? I and a few others have done a little research and found out that as far back as 1979, more than 34 states had active applications for a convention of states to propose a fiscal responsibility amendment. And yet Congress never did anything because they don't want there to be a convention of states to propose a fiscal responsibility amendment. And so I expect that within the next several months, we're going to have several states sue the Congress for failure to discharge their express, enumerated, non-discretionary ministerial responsibility. And we'll see what Congress does, whether they propose something themselves or whether we have the first convention that would propose something, which I believe needs to focus on, constraining the growth of government and debt to GDP rather than a balanced budget or other approaches that people talk about. So we'll see. I mean, that clearly would have serious economic consequences because basically what it would do is it'd say, Congress, you can't continue to mortgage the future of our country and our families. You have to start making tough choices. We're not going to tell you how to solve the problem. We're going to tell you better solve the problem. And if you don't solve the problem, then you got to ask what's the enforcement mechanism. And the enforcement mechanism, you can't stand for re-election. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but it clearly would have serious economic consequences.
No, for sure, and I'm aware of that the Article 5 movement, and there's a lot of chatter about whether there's enough states or not. But I think you're right, absolutely. That one thing that it may do, and you talked about the inability of the mess on Capitol Hill of Congress to do anything realistic, is it may force their hand, because right now I think it's so broken in Congress that on both sides that we don't accomplish anything that we need to accomplish. Like I said, there's a lot of issues that we could be doing, and I think we'll see what happens with that. If like you said, if folks sue the Congress, that'll be in the Supreme Court at some point in the next couple of years, right? And we'll see exactly where it goes, and Congress may actually have to do their job for once, with fear of actually not being able to stay in power for the rest of their lives and then some.
Well, let me clarify too what the efforts are, because there are several efforts going on with regard to Article 5, but the one that's by far the best known and the best financed is something called the Convention of States.
Right.
The Convention of States is looking for 3 amendments: a fiscal responsibility amendment, they're looking for a term limits amendment, and they're also looking for constrain the growth of and scope of the federal government. And they're trying to get 34 states to pass an identical application. And I think they've got 18 or 19. And my personal opinion is they'll never get to 34. And the reason they'll never get to 34 is the number one argument against a convention of states to propose amendments is that it might run away. And so they're leading with their chin. by at the outset saying we want at least three, okay, if you will, and their amendments may be meritorious, but our view is, since the number one argument is runaway, that what we want to do is we want to have a proof of concept. We want to have a convention that focuses on the most important issue, and that is fiscal responsibility. Because if we don't put our finances in order, our economic security, our national security, our international standing, and our domestic tranquility are going to suffer over time. And these other things are important, but they're not nearly as important as that. And so what we've done is, our position is, and we've got constitutional scholars on the left and the right that agree with us, that in coming up with the 34, you count two things. You count plenary applications where the state says, we want to get together to talk about potential amendments. And then you count single subject applications, which deal with the issue of fiscal responsibility. But that's it. You don't count other things like term limits or campaign finance or whatever it might be. You just count those two. You aggregate them. We had 39 in 1979. We had 40 in 1983, of which in 79, 30 were fiscal responsibility only. In 40, 32 were fiscal responsibility only. That's more than a majority of the states. Right. And as you know, when you get together in a convention of states, it's one state, one vote. And therefore, they have the ability to control the scope of the convention. And so we think and the ultimate safeguard, as you know, Dan, is you got to get 38 states to ratify whatever they come up with.
Right.
And you're not going to, if you look at the makeup of state legislatures and the states in general, you're not going to get 38 states to ratify something radical. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to bring our other panelists from the United States, also around the world. We'll bring in Kim Calhoun, who's the president of Pod TV. We're also going to bring in Steve Rao, who's our political analyst, who bebops between Washington, D.C. and the Raleigh-Durham area. And then also Mark Lee, who's also one of our directors, to see if you have any comments relating to what I think are pretty strong decisions. One deals with the Supreme Court decision that I agree with Dave, reverses Chevron. Most people in America they're just not aware that when you walk into certain courts, you're guilty. Like anyone who goes to tax court, it starts off with the IRS is presumed to be correct. And you're going like, wait a minute, I don't get a chance to argue. You're already right. And then when you fight the administrative state, people don't fight the administrative state. But what is it? We're fighting rules that are promulgated, very strong rules, one by the Department of Labor, who's making all my life insurance agents fiduciaries. Boing. They're not fiduciaries. They sell life insurance products. And it never went to any Congress. In other words, Congress didn't pass the law. It's the Department of Labor who created the law and sent it out there. Then I got another problem with the PBGC. Boing, they're attacking all the pension plans of the United States. And after a while, David, I do not believe the government is on the side of the people that live here. They're on their own side. I don't know how any conclusion could be granted otherwise. I'll see you guys in Barcelona next year. I mean, within 60 days.
Let me just mention something real quick.
I'll be living in Spain. But anyway, go on.
Mention something real quick. First, just because I headed the PBGC and the Employee Benefit Security Administration in the past doesn't mean I had anything to do with what you're talking about. But I know, I'm just kidding.
No, David, the whole thing, I've been working with them for 23 years. For 20 of the 23 years, they would work, 20 of the 23 years, they would work with my clients. My clients would make mistakes. They don't know all the rules. They'd work with them and we would go on and we'd do everything right and everything would be gone. The last couple of years when Joe Biden overfunded them, they were $26 billion in debt. He gave them $80 billion. They have more money than they have sense. And they're running around, they're suing. Really, they're suing. And I'm in federal court in 2 cases. And you know how many pensioners are there? 3. There's 3 people and 2 of them are owners. And we're in a federal district court in Utah. I've got a couple cases that were fighting the PBGC on trying to settle a bloody pension case. Okay, and I'm livid because that's where your government money is going to. Where 20 of the 23 years we didn't have this problem. until there was this major overfunding of the administrative state. So it wasn't
Real quickly, I just have
wasn't
one.
they were going to even. They overfunded. If you
Call
give a lawyer, if you give Dan $2 billion and say go sue people, his law firm will go crazy over that. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so I'm going to Barcelona. See you
Hey,
guys.
I
before
got
I
a quick
leave-
question.
Go ahead. Yeah, I've got to leave early. I just wanted to thank Mark. I'm so sorry. I just want to ask David Walker. I always join in to see him. What do you think about this election? I know we're going to talk about debt today, but should Biden step down? If he doesn't step down, are we handing the presidency to Trump? I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you what your thoughts are.
I'll give you my answer. Yes, I think he should finish his term. I don't think they should impose the 25th Amendment and he'd be the first person to be subject to that. I think he's had this condition for a while and they've just been covering it up. They've been able to manage it. They can manage it for another 6 months, but it's unacceptable to think about him continuing to serve for another 4.5 years. He obviously has cognitive challenges. He obviously has stamina challenges. It's only going to get worse with the passage of time. It's human aging. That's the way that it works. So I think he should finish his term, but he should not seek re-election. But then the Democrats are going to have to decide what they're going to do because they've got $240 million that only Biden and Harris can use. And they've got to decide, are they going to have an open convention? He's got to decide whether he's going to endorse anybody. It's a mess, but I think it's pretty clear. 4 years ago, he was ahead by 10 points in the popular vote. Now he's behind 6 points. Democrats need to be able to win the popular vote by at least 4 points in order to win in the Electoral College. And I don't think he can do that. And it has, it's really because of his mental and physical condition. I mean, there are big differences between Trump and Biden. As you know, I wanted a third choice. I didn't think those were two acceptable choices for very different reasons. But ultimately, we've got to decide between what we've given. Last thing I'll say is I think it's the obligation of his family to talk to him about this. He's had a lifelong objective to become president of the United States. He achieved that. And he's got some things that he can point to that he accomplished during his administration. He deserves a decent retirement. He's not going to get a decent retirement. I mean, I can see him being, and I'm not comparing him to George Washington because they're nothing alike, okay? But George Washington waited too long to retire and died within a year. And he didn't have any decent retirement at all, and he deserved it. So those are my views.
I just had a quick question.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Based on something that Kim talks about a lot and everything, and I just wanted your take on this because I was seeing recently over the weekend that the Feds could slash rates by 200 points over 8 straight meetings and everything. So I just wanted your take on that because I do know that that's something that Kim brings up regularly, is this notion that the Feds could do something majorly around the months of September, October as we head closer to the election. But I just wanted your take on that, Dave.
We're still above the Fed's target. I think, what are we, 3.3% inflation right now? Their target rate is 2%. We're clearly headed in the right direction. Unemployment's gone up. Unemployment has gone up for 2 months in a row. Now I think it's at 4%, which is still low, but it's been going up. My personal view is I don't think you'll see the Fed think about cutting rates, before September. And I don't think if they cut rates, I don't think they'll cut them more than twice, before the end of this year. They've said that they're committed to doing what it takes to bring inflation back down to the 2% level. 3.3 is still, well in excess of what their target is, although we're making some progress. By the way, on the election, I think people have misanalyzed the election. The issue, what people aren't focused on the 3.3%. What they're focused on is the 20% increase in prices since January of 2021. They're focused on the fact that prices for food, prices for energy, prices for insurance, prices for housing, like the average mortgage payment, are up much more than 20%. That's what they're concerned about, okay? And the other thing I would say is that people forget Elections aren't about the past, they're about the future. You can talk about what all you've done in the past. The question is, what are you going to do in the future? And that also relates to not just policy issues, it relates to the person's health and stamina. I mean, you've got to project, how's this person going to be 4.5 years from now? And that's why I think that the vice presidential position is more important this time than typical, because there's a good chance for either one of them. Okay, I think more for Biden than for Trump, but for either one of them, that the vice president might end up having to assume the office, and so I think that's going to be much more significant than it normally is as a result of the candidates.
Just really quickly, follow-up question.
I want to clarify something too about the inflation situation. Is that the rising cost of gas and oil was a big factor in all this because of the ripple effect. It is the biggest part of our utility resource. Everything uses it, from the farms to the tables to the store. Everything uses gas. Yeah. Right. I mean, everything. So, but there is no cap or regulation at all on that. And the executives took advantage of that in these last 4 years, and they jacked the prices up. They knew they had an excessive amount of gas and oil in storage from COVID because they continued to pump, but they didn't have to use anything. So they took advantage of this and really jacked the prices up. And that just rippled really hard. And just to kind of correct something so nobody thinks I'm crazy here, I predicted that the Federal Reserve could be the swing vote, and that if they wanted Biden to win or the Democrats to win, that they would lower the interest rates around September, because people have short-term memory and they'll forget about the fact that they've been paying such a high interest rate, and come November, they'll be happy. If they want the Republicans to win or Trump, they're going to wait. But Powell did say that he had intentions of lowering the interest rate at least one time this year. He did make that announcement. That's very public knowledge. That's not Kim's guesstimating. So
no, that's right. Well, that's it's either September and or December.
Right. It's going to be either or.
There's no way it's going to be 200 basis points. There's no way they're going to lower 200 basis points. That's 2%.
No.
That's not happening.
Well, that'd be so destabilizing to the markets as well if they were to lower it to that degree. So I do want to say, Dave. So a couple of weeks ago, I came on here after I'd been at the dentist, and I had a few people say to me, "Isn't Dave like your favorite person on the network? Because you really gave him a hard time." And I was like, well, and I was trying to cover for myself, So I said, well, he's an older guy. He's a bureaucrat. I've got to give him a hard time every now and then. And I'd like to let my audience know that you're looking very hip and very young. You've color coordinated with me today, wearing pink, so that's a good start. I like it. As to Dan, I've actually already bought your book. I always buy the books of people that show up on the channel. So for our international audience, the book is available on Amazon. A little expensive if you're in Australia, so there are some slightly cheaper options to get it. But I'm very much looking forward to receiving your book. I'm a nerd, so I do actually read a lot about US law, and mostly because actually your laws are a lot more accessible than ours are. So I know that most Australians can probably name a couple of Supreme Court precedent laws in the US, but if you ask Australians to tell you a High Court precedent in Australia, they're going to be struggling to tell you one. So your laws are way more accessible, which I think is fantastic.
Just really quickly to let you know, Dan, I will be adding your book. Dave's book is already there on the Pod TV bookstore, so the bookstore will have your book. I'll add that later on this morning because we have books from the various guests that are. Okay.
I'll cancel my order on Amazon before Kimberly goes off at me. She's going to send me a message afterwards. I told you to buy them from Pod TV. What are you doing?
well, I'm just saying that we'll do that and everything, but you don't have to cancel your order. I do have a question for both Dan and Dave, because one of the things, and I'm going to actually tease Shaquille about this, because I saw something, I think y'all were talking about earlier, about some of the things that are out there in terms of like even the sin taxes and all along those lines. And it was one of the Supreme Court cases, I forget which one y'all were referring to and everything, but I did see that apparently the Gen Z folks are stepping away. I hate to tell folks this because I know I will have a sip every once in a while. And I know that other people will as well, but apparently they are stepping away from alcohol because apparently there's a moderation movement, and this is the reason that the Danish brewer Carlsberg is pouring 4.2 billion into a deal with Pepsi and Lipton distributor Britvic as Gen Zs are shying away from alcohol. So I was just wondering our thoughts on this because apparently this is major economic news that I saw that they're pouring this money in because apparently the Gen Zs are not drinking as much alcohol. I don't know if I agree with that because I live around the campus from Duke University, and I can tell you there are a lot of Gen Z.
Now I'm gonna have to lay into the boomers again. Like it's the boomers' fault. They had this wonderful life, doing their drugs, carrying on at Woodstock, and then telling the Gen Z kids, hey, behave yourself, be conservative, don't drink too much, don't do any drugs. It's their fault, right? Because the Gen Z guys, unlike my generation, the Gen Z guys are actually obedient. And I find that the most interesting thing about the teenagers of today and the early 20-somethings. Because for the rest of us, when we wanted to rebel, we came home and said to our parents, hey, had enough of you, I'm going to rebel, I'm going to get a tattoo, I'm going to get an earring. For me, I grew my hair really long after I finished at private boys' school. I was like, Mum, I'm growing my hair long. Yeah, okay, good work with that. Now we've got a generation of people that come home and say, Mum, Dad, I've had enough. I'm going to rebel. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to be obedient. Whatever the government tells me to do, I'm going to do. And I try to say to these young kids all the time, look, kids, don't be obedient and, just go and drink too much. Go and do some things that you're not supposed to do. Don't cut your genitals off, though, please. That's not rebelling. That's terrible.
They may
What's your
be,
take on that, Dan and Dave?
There is,
they
you know,
may be leaning away from alcohol, but they may be leaning into marijuana and other things. Go
I
ahead.
think that's some,
Well, isn't that a good thing again? Isn't that what you boomers did? Well, we've still got video footage of Woodstock back in the 60s. So, we've seen, we've got your flower power and your combi.
I wasn't there, nor have I ever partaken. Dan, go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say that this is a movement. I've got a soon to be 24-year-old and a 27-year-old, and there's a lot of reports and things about these bars that are now mocktails and really big into mocktails, and there's a lot of more and more non-alcoholic beer, and for whatever reason they're not drinking as much. They're a different generation though. They don't socialize in the same ways. A lot of them don't want to get their driver's license for whatever reason. I mean, a lot of my neighbors and stuff talk about that their kids are eligible, but they're not getting their licenses for whatever reason. But yeah, I can't figure this out. What's causing all of this non-drinking? And like Dave said, maybe they're using cannabis, which is more and more accessible and legal all over the place. But it's interesting to me because I think there's actual bars now that are starting to be focused on this non-alcoholic crowd and having all kinds of really more and more innovative types of drinks that taste good, I guess, and I still like beer and have an occasional beer, but I just don't. Yeah, I don't know what it is that maybe you're right that it's their rebellion.
America, can you please not export this? I mean, you export all the rest of your really shit ideas. You export some good ideas as well, but you really do export the shit ones. Can you not export this one, please? The Australian economy. The Australian economy will completely collapse if you guys export this idea. This is not good.
Export this to you
I want to intervene here, and Dan, you couldn't have hit it any better. The children are leaning more towards the cannabis, less hangovers, easier to use, easier on the body, less liver problems, less health problems. Not as angry and bar fights. I mean, one of my nieces told me that's one of the reasons why she never drank. She said, I'd rather smoke marijuana because, look at those two. They're out there fighting and beating each other up. And so, yeah, I think there has been a shift. You see a lot more vaping, not cigarettes, but vaping. But I've had my doctors share that vaping can be just as dangerous. So I think, but what I did want to tell you about beer, something that a lot of people don't know, and something we did learn about during COVID, is that beer is one of the top 3 in hydration ratios. You can go check me on this. Top 3. And it's got vitamin B12, so it's going to make you happy. So, there's nothing wrong with a beer.
It was also made by women, Kimberly. So that's perhaps your gift to men. But can I just say, we have this issue. Sorry. Go for it, Dan.
For the record, the Walker household has non-alcoholic beer and non-alcoholic wine. It's not that we don't have the other, but we are using that more. And while I normally don't do this, I'll give you 3 brand names that are particularly good. Clausthaler German non-alcoholic beer is very good. Okay. Guinness, like dark beer, Guinness non-alcoholic is very good.
Dave, come on now.
For wine, Be Free is very good. So
Thank you for the tip.
Non-alcoholic Guinness. Come on now. Well, why drink it all? Just have a glass of water. What is this? You conservatives are so boring.
Doesn't taste the same, Shaquille.
Just really quickly.
I do want to say. Hang on, I do want to actually just say something though to Kimberly's comment. So we had during the Great Recession that you guys experienced, we had a massive boom in Australia, and at that time I was actually in Western Australia, so the mining state, so massive boom over there. And a couple of things I think coincided or colluded in order to create a drug problem. So those 2 things were, 1, there was massive increases in taxes on alcohol, and 2, many of the people were working up on the mines, and so they had to do urine tests or blood tests or some other type of test to make sure that they weren't under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And so what happened was, instead of people smoking marijuana, they hit harder narcotics. So we had a massive increase in the usage of cocaine and a few other drugs. And then actually meth became a real big problem for us here in Australia. We don't have fentanyl here yet, and hopefully we never do, like you guys have got. But yeah, meth was massively used. And I remember speaking to the Minister for Police, who was actually the minister for my area at the time, and I said, hey, if you guys keep increasing the taxes on alcohol, what you're going to do is you're going to continue to drive people towards the hard drugs. And I had young people that used to come in, to my bar. I used to have a bar back then, and they would say to me, hey, like, if I take my girlfriend out and there's a few of us, we could spend $300 or $400, buying alcohol. For that same money, or less than that money, we can buy some meth and smoke it and be off our heads all weekend. And I think that's a real problem. I think that we need to recognise as part of government policy that people enjoy being inebriated. People enjoy, having being a little bit off their face from time to time, and we don't want to criminalise that, but we also don't want to make it so that it's so expensive that they can't afford to do it. Because if you do that, they'll end up turning to something that is cheaper, that's nastier. And that's actually the same thing with drug legalization. Marijuana, for example, in Australia is now legal with a prescription, as it is in many states of the United States. But it's more expensive, from what I understand. It's more expensive to get it that way than it is to get it on the street. So, we've got to look at how we're actually addressing these issues. And I think that abstinence is not a solution.
Hey, just really quickly, there's no joke.
Economics. You're talking about the economics of this, so it's
yes, Dave. Now my reputation is going to be the guy that talks about the economics of drug use. Thank you very much. My reputation happens.
I want to get back to economics. I did have an economics question. By the way, meth is no joke, because I've had some relatives that are part of the Native American side of my family that were very much caught up in that trade, and I can tell you that it is no joke, and it can be some very serious consequences. Fortunately, they are off of that mess, and I'm so glad that they are off of it as best I can tell and everything. But I did have an economics question, because one of the things that I know we talk about here on this network, and if Steve was here, he'd bring it up as well and everything, is this notion of AI. And one of the articles that I saw, and I love to hear Dan's thought about this as well as Dave, is that the majority of CFOs, that's the folks that are actually in charge of these businesses and everything, have no clue what AI is, even though AI is very much an important part of their business strategy. So I just wanted y'all's take on that, because if it is part of the economic system, and AI seems to be part of the new economic system, it seems to me that the folks in control of these various businesses, whether they're small businesses or big business, need to have an understanding of it. But apparently there was a recent poll that said the majority of CFOs are like, I have no clue what AI is.
I've just actually enrolled in the Australian equivalent of what you guys would call trade schools, because the CSIRO, which is a big intergovernment agency here, teamed up with the Australian government and are actually offering 8 separate units of AI and digital knowledge for free, actually, to anybody who lives here. And I've just done it. And the reason I did it was I was actually watching a YouTube video, and there were some kids there that actually knew nothing about trading, but they knew something about AI, and they were actually able to create strategies to trade the markets. Now, the strategies are objectively terrible, but the fact of the matter is that I can use those sorts of techniques to do a lot of data analytics that would have taken me, 6 months before. Based on what I'm seeing the AI do, I can do it in minutes. I rely on a family member of mine who is deputy principal of the School of Maths and Statistics at one of the Ivy League universities of Australia. I remember ringing him after I got so frustrated after 2 weeks. I was trying to work something out, and I said, "Hey, this is what I'm trying to work out." He said, "Look, send me the data and tell me what you're trying to work out." And as I was trying to explain it to him, he just gave me the answer because he used R instead of using Excel. Now, as we know, I'm a technophobe, but the thing with AI is that you can actually use it. I wouldn't use it to write my code. I wouldn't. Well, maybe I would, but at the moment, I wouldn't use it to write my code, and I certainly wouldn't use it to replace people altogether. But certainly, it can. From what I've used so far of it, it's able to provide me with an advantage where I can play with things, where I can have an experiment. I can say, look, I want to know what the data says about this. And I think, someone like Dave, if you go back 30 or 40 years ago, hey, what happens if we increase the amount of the M1 money supply to this degree? And although you're not going to get a proper answer, the AI can give you an indication. You can experiment with things and then see, if there's perhaps an unintended consequence that you didn't see before. So I'm very excited about AI. I know people are worried about, it displacing human beings, but I'm actually very excited about it. I've learned to love it. So I would suggest that everybody learn it. I suggest that it is introduced into the school system.
But Dave and Dan, what is your take on that?
On the topic, and the initial intent was never to replace humans. It was to improve the quality of life and to improve our jobs, but not to replace HI. But all too often you get those greedy CEOs who think, oh, I can replace all of my people. Even the airlines tried that once when they tried to replace all of the people there at the airport with all of these kiosks and artificial intelligence. And the first sandstorm that came in one of the airports that I was at shut everything down, and they had to call everybody back in that day to do everything by hand. So, you can't. I don't know how often I have to speak on this, but you cannot replace human intelligence because AI is only as intelligent as the humans who feed it. So,
yeah, I think the bottom line is AI is a double-edged sword. I think it's more positive. It's more positive than negative. Okay, it helps be able to do data analytics of massive amount of data very, very quickly. But as has been said, garbage in, garbage out. So you got to be careful about what data is it using to be able to do that. As an example, I used one of the better known artificial intelligence platforms. I asked it 10 questions, of which they were fact-based questions of which I knew the answers because they related to me. They got 5 out of the 10 wrong. Now things will get better over time. So they can really help, productivity. CFOs clearly ought to be familiar with this because You can use it for financial analysis. You can use it for competitor analysis. You can use it for a number of other things.
Okay, I said I enrolled in the course. Leave me alone.
Hold on. It will displace some jobs. There's no question. Okay, there's no question that it will, but it also may create some jobs as well. And so we'll have to wait and see. Last thing, it is a huge. This is Bernie Sanders, huge user of energy.
It is.
And
That
is going to be a challenge because our system, our grid is already challenged. And so we've got AI, and now we've got all these green initiatives or whatever, like EV vehicles and things of that nature. Oh, and by the way, we're supposed to have 100,000 plus charging stations from the green energy bill that passed over 2 years ago. They've built 7.
Right.
So,
And
Dave,
you
I
mentioned
think
about the energy, quantum computing really chews it up.
That's
It
right.
really
So,
uses up
Dave,
the energy. They have yet to truly understand their own quantum computers they built. They're always asking for people to come in and find different ways to use it. What I would recommend somebody to do, if they're looking for a job in that part of the industry, is to go out and become more familiar with user interface, because I'm finding that those are the people that a lot of the companies are hiring right now, are people who understand AI and user interface. And that's just some of the recent careers that I have noticed being posted, or CEOs asking, hey, do you know anybody who could do that? So, but the quantum computers will use it up. I agree.
Dan,
So, Dave, let me say to you that I think people would be well served, the electorate of the United States would be well served to treat the US federal government like it's a teenage girlfriend, right? Because they're going to blow up your credit card, they're going to spend a heap of money, and you've got to rein that in, okay? Otherwise, you're going to go broke and you're not going to be able to afford it. But the second thing I would say is that I think that there is some waste of money that goes on in the pursuit of green energy initiatives. And some of that's going to happen because the technology is just not there. But hey, progress is being made. Maybe that's a positive. But I will say that any criticism that the electricity grid can't support the technologies, I don't think is true. It may be true insofar as the existing technology is not there, but we can fix the energy issues tomorrow. Like, it's very easy to fix these from a combination of nuclear, hydro, geothermal power. These things can be fixed very easily. And there's no doubt in my mind that the reason why it's not being done is because of politics. And politics is stopping it because of big corporate money, as I've said a lot recently. That is distorting the market. And I think it distorts the market in such a way that people fall into this. It's the Democrats' fault. It's the Labor Party's fault because they're trying to do all this stuff, or it's the Conservative Party's fault because they're trying to do all this other stuff. No, it's actually both of them. The whole political system has just become so corrupted by big money that it's very difficult for the people to actually get things done that they actually want to get done, and we need to do something to stop that.
It's the fourth branch of government. It's the lobbyists. That the expenditures, the amount of money that goes to people on both sides of the issue is astounding and breathtaking if you know it. So on this artificial intelligence thing, this is my second profession. I started out as an accountant, graduated in 1988, and I remember when we were starting to use Lotus 1-2-3 for massive amounts of data, which was superior to Excel for a lot of reasons. But the older people, my supervisors and stuff would have me do 10 keys because they didn't trust that the formulas were actually working, right? And so that, is it artificial intelligence? No, but it was a step in the right direction. And what was the fear? That the accounting firms would shrink in size? Well, that hasn't happened. And then jump ahead to legal. And in 2006, I think it was, the Civil Code of Civil Procedure changed to do electronic discovery. And so people were talking about, oh my God, what are we going to do as big law firms? And you see the data on that the reality is that We've now got partners at some of the biggest law firms making more than $20 million a year. They broke through the $20 million barrier, so they're like venture capitalists. So something's going right in the practice of law. And again, did it displace some jobs? Sure, it did, but it changed, again, what the focus is. And artificial intelligence is, as Dave said, I think it's a double-edged sword. I think the positives do outweigh the negatives. And I think that companies, it's the thing that's been talked about in the legal profession right now. They say, well, AI is going to replace lawyers. But the comeback is AI is not going to replace lawyers, but those lawyers that use AI will replace those who refuse to use it, because there are some benefits and tools and some efficiencies that come into play. So I think, the fact that the CFOs don't know, that seems preposterous to me. I guess if you jump back, though, about a decade or so ago, an area where I spent a lot of time in privacy and cyber, they would have said the same thing about cyber, right? And their cyber insurance and cyber risk, they would have probably said the same thing, that they weren't very aware of that. My admonition to all these CFOs would be to get up to speed quickly, understand it, develop policies and practices within your organization, because it's not going away. It's like the chips in Moore's rule, right? It becomes more and more efficient. They become better and better. I've done similar things to what Dave said about searches that I know the answers to, and yeah, sometimes it comes up with some crazy stuff. You're like, how in the heck did it even come up with this list? Because some of the names on this list that came back, or the answers, are just nonsense, and so we've got work to do. But I think CFOs that don't pay attention, companies that don't pay attention, are going to be left behind those that do embrace it.
Dan, please never mention
Dan,
local
thank
front
you for
three again.
mentioning that. Thank you. Cybersecurity is very important too, and I just want to give everyone a little bit of an update. CBK, who is a huge firm for especially a lot of dealerships, car dealerships, was hacked a couple of weeks ago. Apparently they didn't follow the two main rules I've always preached, which is backup and redundant. Always have a redundant system if you've got that level of clientele, and a backup if not 3 or 4. They did pay the ransom and nothing's happened. In fact, the dealerships are all doing everything by hand and crying when you go in to talk to them, because they can't pull any data up like they're used to. And again, they got used to all the AI and the computers doing everything for them. They can still do their job. It's just a lot more tasks involved. But make sure you get the right cybersecurity in place. And I'm finding that is something people are not investing in enough. But I have a question for Dan.
How'd you get
Where
that,
do you
Kimberly?
think the next thing for, especially in the Supreme Court, that they can use AI? How do you think it can improve it?
Well, I don't know that the Supreme Court will ever use AI. They won't allow videos in the courtroom, so I think that they're talk about technophobes. I don't think that they're really technically efficient, and they've become sloppy in recent years. There was the Dobbs leak, but there was also earlier this year a concurrence or dissent from Sotomayor in one of the cases that leaked the day before it came out. It was in the Idaho abortion pill drug. So I'm not sure that the Supreme Court will use it. There was a judge on the 11th Circuit recently that wrote a concurrence about artificial intelligence and kind of addressed it in great detail about whether or not it'll happen. Back about a year or two ago, I don't know if any of you saw it, but there was a challenge or an offer that ChatGPT or one of these main players was going to offer $1 million to an advocate to go into the Supreme Court and use artificial intelligence. I'm not sure, number one, how the artificial intelligence would be able to do answers and questions and responses in real enough time. And number two, I would think that any lawyer that was doing that in the courtroom might be facing some malpractice claims, because they get bad information if you're relying on the AI. I think it's still, for the courts, I think it's still going to be a large amount of in-person and actual humans still. But eventually we may get to the point where it can digest some of the exhibits or some of the information. I serve as an arbitrator in the cases, and sometimes I get 5,000 pages of medical bills and things, and it's impossible for me to decipher what the heck's going on in those. So
There was a guy that recently got caught having the AI or ChatGPT write his submissions, and the submissions sounded perfectly, except the GPT had made up laws that didn't exist.
right?
So
My chat GDP has just told me we're at the hour, so we have to go. I want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, Dan Cotter, who's an adjunct professor at the John Marshall Law School, which, by the way, has the #1 ranked employee benefits LLM in the country, for people who don't know, John Marshall out of Chicago. And we'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Until then, stay safe and stay out of debt. Take care. Bye-bye.